WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network presents the Relationship Ready Mind Talk Show with transformational life coach, Angela Kane.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Relationship Ready Mind Talk Show. My name's Angela Kane, and you're listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, and I hope you enjoy the topic that I've got for you tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about your shadow. And what on earth is your shadow, I can hear you saying. Well, I'm going to explain what that is, and if you were listening last week, you will know that over the next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about the book that I've written, which is called From Fear to Fabulous. And in that book, it explains the process the coaching process that I've devised, that I guide my clients through. And at the end of it, they are completely transformed. They're different people. They think differently, act differently, and so on. My goal is to help them to become whole again, to become whole human beings, and not operating from the subconscious patterns that tend to run our lives in the background that we're very often not aware of. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about last week we talked about the steps that we actually go through. And tonight we're going to talk about your shadow, and we're going to take a deep dive into the fragmented parts of your soul. We're going to say hello to your fears, and we're going to quick step back to wholeness. Now, what is the shadow? Well, whether you're aware of it or not, we all have many selves that make up our personality, also known as our shadow. And quite simply, the shadow is the parts of the self that we don't like, that we've disowned, that we've chosen to ignore because we're afraid or ashamed of them. And we think that other people won't like us if they knew who we really are. So we disown those parts and try to hide them from the world. And hidden deep beneath our personality are layers of repressed energy which can inhibit our development by forcing us to avoid individual experiences, and they can even cause damaging addictions like alcoholism or drug addiction. And this trapped energy is known as the shadow, and it was first talked about by the psychologist Carl Jung. And what happens is we wear a mask, really, so that people can't see us. They can't see the real us. We shield parts of our true nature from the world. But what we don't know is that those parts are visible to everyone, apart from us. We actually hide nothing because our shadow parts come out in moments of anger or when we're triggered. In those moments, it's usually our shadow parts that react the quickest. So let's just suspend any denial for a moment that these parts, these elements of us exist, and just put that aside for now and have an honest conversation with yourself. Many aspects of the self are unacceptable to the ego mind, which is why they're in the shadow. It's like we lock those parts of ourselves away in the cellar and forget about them. We all, as I said before, have many different parts. We'll have a doubter part. We all have a critic. I'm sure you're familiar with that one. Many of us have a control freak, a pleaser, a victim part, a hero, a vulnerable child, and many other sub-personalities. As I said, we have many different selves, which are archetypal characters that make up our whole being. The self, the me, that we talk about. And according to the Sufis, and if you've not heard about the Sufis, Sufism is described as the mystical arm of Islam. According to the Sufis, we all have a negative and a positive ego. And the positive ego is our self-respect, our integrity, our honesty, and the negative ego distorts our perceptions and causes us to see the world from the perspective of that part of the shadow personality which can take charge at any given time with whatever situation that we're facing. And according to the Sufis, and also to Carl Jung, all of our parts have value. They're valuable and have, at certain times in our lives, served us in some way. In fact, more than likely, they've probably saved us. And these different aspects of the self are not to be confused in any way with multiple personality disorder, which is a mental illness and entirely different from what we're talking about here. These parts are the other selves and are perfectly natural, and everyone has them. And to be completely whole, we must have our body, mind, and spirit all working together. And too often, most people ignore the other aspects of the self and just concentrate on the physical being. But we're so much more than that. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And a model of consciousness that I learned some years ago from one of my mentors describes this human journey perfectly. And as soon as I heard it, I knew it was absolute truth. This model of consciousness was developed by Carl Jung, and it's a brilliant and succinct way of explaining the shadow. We are born as essence. We come into this world whole and complete. And at an early age, we're wounded. And this wound is meant to happen. It's part of the process that separates us from our mother. And what happens then is a protector part comes in to protect us and to keep us safe. And this part then forms our personality. And we think that is who we are. But as I said earlier, we're so much more than that. We have all the other aspects of ourself that we've not tapped into. And the wounded parts then retreat into the shadow and form the other selves of the personality. The parts that we've disowned because of shame or guilt or a feeling that these parts won't be accepted, and we try desperately to hide them. The thing is, we can't hide what's in our shadow because those parts show up when we go into the fight or flight mode. When something happens to make us angry, fearful, jealous, or whatever incident we're responding to. And as soon as we're triggered, the shadow takes charge. We go through so much of our life unaware of this until we say, hang on a minute here, why do I keep doing the same thing over and over? And we then start to question everything in our life once we get on this path of consciousness. And it's around this time that we start searching for answers. And so begins the spiritual journey back to wholeness, to the essence of who we are, our soul's journey. The journey back to wholeness usually happens around midlife, which is a state of mind rather than a number. And it's at this time in our life when we start asking deeper questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? What am I meant to be doing with my life? Those types of things. And when we do begin to ask these questions and start searching for answers, we start the journey back to who we are at the core of our being. And on this trip, we travel back through the wound and start to figure out the patterns of behaviour, usually with the help of a coach or mentor, as it's really hard to figure all of this out on your own, if not impossible. But then we can start to see our wounds not as something to hide away in the darkness, not something that we need to be ashamed of, but something to welcome into the light as part of us. That part is useful and has served us in our earlier years. I find it incredible that some people don't even ask themselves these sorts of questions, as I've always pondered on this kind of stuff for as long as I can remember. And I would guess that you have also, if you're listening to this show. If you choose to read this book, then you've already been considering these types of questions, because you're a truth seeker and you want to understand and get some clarity on yourself first and foremost. But you also want to know this thing called life is about. And above all, what is the most important question? What is the meaning of life? Don't we want to know that our lives matter? Don't we all deep down want to know that we've made a difference and that the world is a better place for us being here? I know that I do, that this is paramount importance to me, and my work gives meaning to my life. That's why I do what I do, and the reason why I'm doing this show and have written this book. So that you, the people that are listening or reading this, won't have to try and understand it all on your own. You'll have a head start and you'll know where to go looking for answers, which are, of course, inside yourself. Once we start to look into our shadow and discover for ourselves the parts of us that are hiding there, that everyone else but us can see, once we know about these parts that are running our lives, they no longer have the same control over us. And as I mentioned before, at some point in our life, these disowned parts have saved us. They've protected us and were very useful. We don't want to get rid of them because they're part of us. And all of our parts are necessary and all have their role to play. What we want to do is integrate them back into the self. We have many aspects of the self, of the shadow, the unconscious parts, but I discovered in my work 7 of the most common ones through coaching many, many women. And they are the critic, the judge, the victim, the doubter, the pleaser, the saboteur, and the overthinker. And so we're just going to take a quick break now, but we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're going to be discussing the part that many of you, if not all of you, will be very familiar with, the inner critic.
You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio Channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.
Hello and welcome back to the Relationship Ready Mind Talk Show with me, Angela Kane. And before the break, we were talking about the shadow parts of our nature, parts of ourselves that we actually disown at a young age, parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, that we don't really want to look at. But those parts of us actually end up running our lives in the background. And just before the break, we went through the 7 most common ones that I've discovered through coaching many, many women. And the first one that I want to talk about is the inner critic. I'm sure you're all more than familiar with the inner critic. Yes, we all know that one, don't we? And it has a loud voice in most of us. And the critic is the voice that tells us that we're hopeless, that we're useless, that we're not good enough, that we're not attractive enough, we're not thin enough. It's the voice of the I'm not enough syndrome. Can you imagine what your life would be like without that critic? It'd be blissful. However, the critic does serve a purpose, but when it's very loud and negative, we don't need to listen to it. We need to be able to quiet the mind and change that voice from negative to a positive message. A message that encourages us and not puts us down at every available opportunity. One that supports us. Just think for a moment how different your life would be if you didn't have that voice berating you most of the time. Can you even imagine how you would feel? The different actions that you'd take? Well, I can promise you that although you cannot stop those messages coming, you can change them to much more positive ones. And it's essential to do that if you want peace of mind. So the next part that I want to discuss is the judge. And be honest, how many of you are fearful of being judged? Oh, to live in a world where there was no judgment. Judgment causes many problems and so much pain. We do many things and also refrain from doing many things because of judgment. Because we're afraid. We judge ourselves, usually very harshly indeed, and we also judge other people. We're afraid to shine, to show off our gifts and talents to the world, because we're so scared of being judged. Judgment is a part of our society. We all do it. But if we stopped doing it, the world would be a very different place. I now make a conscious effort not to judge people. I try my hardest not to. It's not easy because it's such an ingrained habit in society. But we can stop it. And the first person you need to stop judging is yourself, because it does inhibit you on so many levels. Just imagine if you were the only person on the planet. Is there anything that you'd be afraid of doing? There'd be no one to judge you. Just stop and think how that feels for a moment, to be able to do anything without fear of judgment. Something to contemplate. And make a conscious effort to stop yourself each time you go into judgment, whether this is about yourself or other people. So I challenge you to try this for a week and see how your perception changes. The next part that's very familiar in women is the victim. And we all know about victim mentality. But how many of us refrain from going there? Do you blame others for your misfortune? Do you think that you are just an unfortunate soul and that all these bad things keep happening to you? What if I were to tell you you can change? And you can change now, starting today. Being a victim is not a good state to be in because it puts you on the effect side of the equation and not the cause side. And we always want to be on the cause side because it's from there that the magic happens. And here we're delving into one of the universal laws now, which I won't go into at this moment, but we will be discussing later on. Suffice to say, though, that the causal side of things is where creation happens, and the effect side is the result side. And when we're in victim mode, things are happening to us. We feel powerless and very much the victim of circumstance. And once we flip that around and take responsibility for our actions and our life, and believe it or not, everything that happens in life has been created on some level by us. And then we have the doubter. The doubter and the critic are close cousins. The doubter says, oh, I'd better not do that. What if I fail? And the critic agrees and says, yes, don't bother. You'd be rubbish anyway. They compound each other consistently. Dealing with your doubter is imperative if you want to move forward with your life. You have to learn to trust, to conquer your doubts about yourself and your abilities. If you don't trust yourself, you won't trust anyone else either. Self-trust is something that can be developed. It's a muscle that's there, but it's probably weak if you've not been using it. And you can strengthen it with a bit of determination, because nothing spurs the doubter more than when we don't keep our word and we don't keep our agreements with others and also with ourselves. How many times have you said you were going to do something and then not done it? That just eggs the doubter on. So being in integrity with yourself and with others is very, very important to develop self-trust. Now we're going to move on to the pleaser, another trait that I found in many women. And again, it's tied to fear, judgment, rejection, etc. We're afraid that people might not like us or love us if we don't do as they want. So many women lose their identity through this pattern as it becomes a habit. We forget who we are, what we want, and what we like. I've worked with so many women over the years who don't know what they like and what they want when they first start working with me. They're just not used to thinking about it, about what their likes and dislikes are. They really don't know. And some of my clients who've been divorced or widowed haven't got a clue what they like and what they enjoy. They've been so defined by their partner for so many years and wanted to please them that their own identity is buried deep inside them. On the journey of self-discovery that I take my clients on, they discover a whole side of their being that they didn't know before. And one of the first things we do is learning to say no. We so often agree to things that we don't want to do. And each time we do this, we're out of alignment with our true feelings, and our self-esteem will suffer because of it. Saying yes when we mean no becomes such a habit with many women that we just do it automatically without even thinking about it. And then we get that sinking feeling in the pit of our stomach and think, oh, I really don't want to do that. But we talk ourselves into it. The doubter and the critic then have a field day with each other, discussing all the reasons why you should do whatever it is that you've agreed to, and the awful consequences of what might happen if you don't, or what you might miss out on. Well, first of all, I'd recommend that you remove the word should from your vocabulary. It immediately indicates that you're wrong, or that you're going to be wrong. Secondly, learning to say no instead of saying yes feels scary, but it's a muscle that's unused. Like many others that are weak, you've forgotten that they're there. Rest assured they are there, and once you start to use them, it becomes easier and easier. And each time you say no and you're honest about your feelings, your self-worth rises. I learnt from a Native American shaman a few years ago that once we start to feel more worthy and listen to our feelings, the inner wisdom that we all have, if our gut feeling's indicating that it's something that we don't want to do, even slightly, then that means it's a definite no and don't do it. We know that instinctually, but once the mind chatter starts and the critic and the doubter and the pleaser all join forces, we're completely overruled by them. We give in and worry about the consequences of saying no. One of my mentors said many years ago, and I quote, "I'm an old man and I have had many worries, most of which have never happened. So begin to trust that inner knowing inside of you, for it knows better than anyone else the right thing for you. Start to practice exercising the muscle of saying no. It's actually quite liberating. And once you've done it a few times, I promise you it gets easier and easier. So give it a try and start to form new and much healthier habits. And the next pattern we're going to touch on briefly is the saboteur. And I know you've met this pattern before if you're attracted to the kind of work that I do. So many of us engage in subconscious self-sabotage. We sabotage our success and happiness. And the bottom line is this has to do with your self-worth, the value you put on yourself and the beliefs that you hold about yourself, about your life and your capabilities. You'll never be happier than you believe you deserve to be, or more successful than you think you're capable of being. These ideas are in fact just thoughts that you've been told or have deduced from past experiences. They're just plain old limiting beliefs. And our beliefs about ourselves and the world around us are formed early in life. And our wounds then keep repeating the same patterns as we grow and evolve. And our beliefs are created from these wounds. And as such, we're building a belief system around fragmented parts, not the whole self. And this is a distorted and limited view, because we're spiritual beings. And as such, we're limitless. And anything that is humanly possible is within our grasp. Yes, we all excel in some fields more than others, but we limit ourselves so much due to our belief system that was designed through a lens that has a distorted picture of who we really are. So if things are not going right for you at the moment, then do something about it. Just know that the saboteur has played a part in this. If we don't believe we're worthy of a great job, a fantastic relationship, optimal health, perfect weight, or whatever it is, we will subconsciously sabotage ourselves somewhere along the way. And what we believe will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It has to happen in line with universal law. We will inadvertently do something to cause this thing to fail. And that's all down to self-sabotaging patterns of behaviour, because we just cannot believe that such good fortune or happiness can be ours. Again, we can change this, because once we become aware of these traits and the unconscious behaviours, they no longer have the same level of power over us. And we can begin to put measures and practices in place to counteract them. And if this is something that you think you may be doing, I urge you to investigate these issues further so that you can discontinue this debilitating pattern. And then we have the overthinker. So many of my clients struggle with this one. And once again, it's closely related to the doubter and the pleaser. In fact, all of the hidden patterns support and encourage each other in their quest to keep us stuck. Really, what they're trying to do is keep us safe. You know what this is like. Something has happened. It can be such a trivial thing to begin with. And you think it over. And then you think about it some more. And eventually, the whole thing has become magnified and you're imagining the worst possible circumstances of whatever situation is causing you to feel anxious. It may be something like your boyfriend's not called you when he's away on business or something like that. And before you know it, the doubter and the critic set to work to provide you with perfectly formed pictures in your mind of the worst possible outcomes. You're distraught, having palpitations, visioning him with some stunning beauty. And you're ready to call time on the relationship, when in fact, he may just have had a busy day and not had a minute in between meetings to call you. Can you see that you could have created that picture in your mind? And you've caused the feelings in your body that you're feeling because of your overthinking joining forces with the doubter and the critic. An uncontrolled mind is such a demon in our lives. This is hell. And this is what we do to ourselves on a daily basis. And none of these subconscious patterns want to harm you. They want to protect you and save you from being hurt and disappointed and embarrassed. They're there to keep you safe. And at some point in your life, they really have served you. But now it's time to thank them and let them go. Realize that they are inhibiting you from reaching your dreams and goals. You can't stop your thoughts coming, but you can change them. You create your state of being by the thoughts you're consistently thinking. The words we say to ourselves and the pictures we form in our mind create our life. It's that simple. And you must have a clear vision of what you want and set your intention to get it if you want to live a happy, peaceful, and fulfilled life. So we've reached the end of our time together today, but I do hope that you found this information valuable. And if so, please do drop me a line or send me any questions. You can contact me via the button on the radio station's page. Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to the Relationship Ready Mind Talk Show with me, Angela Kane. And this is on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. So don't forget to tune in again next week where we'll be talking about some other conscious behaviours that will help you get your life back on track. So take care and bye for now.